The man across the street was an enigma, a silent shadow in our quiet cul-de-sac. Then, in one brutal afternoon, I watched two officers turn his front yard into a battlefield, shattering not just his legs, but my entire illusion of safety. The man in the house across the street, the one in the slate-gray Colonial, was an enigma. He'd moved in about 3 months ago. No moving truck, just a sleek black sedan that was always immaculately clean, and a few boxes he carried in himself. He was tall, built like a former athlete, and kept to himself. In a neighborhood of manicured lawns and overly friendly potluck invitations, he was a ghost. We'd wave, he'd give a curt nod back. His name, according to the Welcome Basket Committee, was Marcus. That's all we knew. I work from home, my desk positioned perfectly in a second-floor office that overlooks our quiet cul-de-sac. It's usually mind-numbingly boring. I watch Mrs. Gable struggle with her recycling bins every Tuesday, and the Amazon driver who's clearly in a one-sided feud with the Henderson's garden gnome. But I'd found myself watching Marcus's house more than I'd care to admit. Not out of suspicion, but pure curiosity. He'd leave at odd hours, sometimes in a suit, sometimes in tactical-looking cargo pants. He'd return late, the silent growl of his sedan the only sign of his arrival. My wife, Sarah, joked he was a spy. I laughed it off, guessing he was some kind of high-level corporate security. That afternoon, the normalcy of our street was shattered. I was on a conference call, doodling on a notepad, when the flash of red and blue caught my eye. A police cruiser crawled down our street, slow and predatory. It didn't stop at one of the usual spots, the Petersons, whose teenage son threw loud parties, but pulled up directly in front of Marcus's house, parking at a sharp, aggressive angle that blocked his driveway. My heart started a low, anxious drumbeat. This was different. 2 officers got out. One was older, thick-set, with a ruddy face and a swagger that screamed authority complex. The other was younger, leaner, with a nervous energy about him. I muted my call, my focus entirely on the scene unfolding below. Just then, Marcus's garage door slid open. He was in workout clothes, a towel slung over his shoulder, carrying a bag of trash to the curb. He didn't even seem to notice the officers at first. "Hey, you!" The older cop, Miller, according to his name tag, which I could just make out, barked. His voice cut through the quiet afternoon air like a saw. Marcus stopped. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. He didn't look scared or surprised, just observant. He set the trash bag down. "Can I help you, officers?" His voice was calm, a deep baritone that carried easily. "We've had reports of a suspicious individual case in the neighborhood, someone matching your description." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. A suspicious individual? Marcus lived here. I'd seen him bring in his own groceries, mow his own lawn. This was wrong. This was so incredibly wrong. Marcus's posture didn't change. "I live here," he stated simply, gesturing with his thumb toward his own front door. I was taking out my trash. "We're gonna need to see some ID," Miller demanded, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered weapon. The younger cop, Davis, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking from his partner to Marcus, then up at the houses. His eyes swept past my window. I instinctively ducked back. "My ID is inside my house, officer," Marcus said, his tone still even but with a new edge of firmness. "You don't have probable cause to demand my papers while I'm standing on my own property. If you have a warrant, I'd be happy to see it." That was the wrong thing to say. Miller's face flushed a deeper shade of red. It was like Marcus had lit a fuse. "Oh, we got a real lawyer here, do we? Thinks he knows the law?" He took a step forward, invading Marcus's personal space. "You're being evasive. That's suspicious. Now I'm telling you, show me your ID." "I'm not being evasive. I'm asserting my rights," Marcus replied, standing his ground. He held his hands up slightly, palms open. It was a clear de-escalation move. But Miller wasn't interested in de-escalation. He was interested in dominance. "Hands behind your back. You're under arrest for loitering and failure to identify." My jaw dropped. Loitering? In his own driveway? It was insane. Marcus didn't move. "You can't be serious." "He looked serious to me," Miller snarled, and then it happened. It was so fast, so brutally efficient, I almost didn't process it. Miller lunged, grabbing Marcus's arm. Marcus instinctively tensed and pulled back. That was all the excuse Miller needed. He shouted, resisting arrest, and the younger cop, Davis, finally jolted into action. They swarmed him. Marcus was strong, I could see that, but it was 2 against 1. They slammed him against the side of his own sedan. I heard a sickening thud as his head hit the passenger window. He grunted in pain. They wrestled him to the pristine asphalt of his driveway. Miller had him in a chokehold while Davis tried to cuff him. But Marcus was struggling, trying to get air, his powerful legs kicking out. And then I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Miller, grunting with exertion, pulled out his heavy metal baton. He didn't aim for Marcus's back or arms. He brought it down with the full force of his body onto Marcus's left leg, just below the knee. A sound, a wet, horrifying crack, echoed across the cul-de-sac. It was a sound that wasn't meant to be made by a human body. Marcus let out a guttural scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that ripped through the placid suburban air. His body went limp, but Miller wasn't done. He raised the baton again and brought it down on Marcus's other leg with the same sickening crack. Marcus was silent now, his face pressed into the asphalt, his body convulsing slightly. The 2 officers, breathing heavily, finally managed to wrench his arms behind his back and slap the cuffs on. My own breath was caught in my throat. My hands were shaking. I could hear Sarah calling my name from downstairs, asking what that noise was. I couldn't answer. From my window, I could see Marcus's face, twisted in a mask of pain I can't even begin to describe. His eyes were squeezed shut, but then, for a split second, they opened. And they weren't looking at the cops standing over him. They were looking straight up, past the manicured lawn, past the oak tree on his front yard. He was looking directly at my window, directly at me. And in that moment, as sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't just pain. It was a cold, terrifying focus. It was the look of a predator who had just been wounded, not a victim who had just been broken. I finally managed to unstick my feet from the floor and stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What was that? What was that scream?" Sarah called again, her voice tight with panic as she came up the stairs. She appeared in the doorway of my office, her face pale. "My God, what's happening?" I couldn't form a coherent sentence. I just pointed, my hand trembling, towards the scene outside. Her eyes followed my finger, and she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. We stood there together, 2 silent, horrified spectators, watching the paramedics arrive. They moved with a practiced urgency, cutting Marcus's shirt open, starting an IV, and carefully, so carefully splinting his horrifically misshapen legs. Miller and Davis stood off to the side, talking to a newly arrived sergeant. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see their gestures, the confident posturing. They were already spinning their story. A violent suspect, a necessary use of force, resisting arrest. The lies were so thick I could practically taste them from 100 feet away. Did you see what they did?" Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. I nodded, unable to look away. "They broke his leg, Sarah, for nothing. He was just taking out the trash." We watched as they loaded Marcus onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Before they closed the doors, his head turned one last time, his eyes sweeping the quiet street until they landed, once again, on my window. That same intense, chilling focus. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a plea for help. It felt like an acknowledgement, a filing of information. It was the most terrifying look I've ever received in my life. The ambulance door slammed shut and it pulled away, its sirens now silent, leaving only the flashing lights of the police cruisers to paint our street in garish strokes of red and blue. "You have to call someone," Sarah said, grabbing my arm. You have to tell them what you saw." "And say what?" I shot back, my voice harsher than I intended. "That two cops just crippled a man for nothing? Who's going to believe me over them? They'll say I'm mistaken. They'll dig into my life. They'll make things difficult for us. You know how this works." "So we just do nothing?" she asked, her eyes welling with tears. "We let them get away with that?" I didn't have an answer. For the next hour, we watched as the scene was managed. A tow truck came and hauled away Marcus's pristine sedan, which now had a spiderweb crack in the passenger window. The sergeant took Miller and Davis's statements. Neighbors started to creep out onto their lawns, drawn by the commotion, whispering amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The official narrative was already taking shape on the suburban grapevine. The new guy, the quiet one, must have done something terrible. Why else would the police do that? Then something changed. A black Crown Victoria, completely unmarked, with a tinted windshield, rolled silently down the street and parked behind the sergeant's car. It didn't look like a local police vehicle. Two people got out, a man and a woman, both dressed in sharp, dark business suits that looked completely out of place on our sleepy cul-de-sac. They moved with an unhurried, deliberate confidence that immediately set them apart from the uniformed officers. The sergeant, who had been commanding the scene, seemed to deflate as they approached. The man in the suit spoke to him in a low voice, and the sergeant's face went from authoritative to alarmed. He started nodding quickly, gesturing towards Miller and Davis. The woman in the suit pulled out a notepad and walked over to the two officers. She didn't ask them questions as a group. She separated them, taking Miller to one side of the street, and the man in the suit took Davis to the other. The casual, backslapping camaraderie was gone. Miller's face, which had been smug and triumphant, was now slick with sweat. The younger cop, Davis, looked like he was about to be sick. He kept glancing at the house, at the blood stain on the asphalt, at my window. "Who are they?" Sarah breathed, standing beside me again. "I have no idea," I said, "but they're not from the local precinct." The two figures in suits were ruthlessly efficient. They didn't seem to be investigating a crime scene, so much as securing an asset. They took photos on their phones, spoke into their wrists like something out of a movie. And within 20 minutes, they had Miller and Davis in the back of separate patrol cars. The sergeant was left standing on the sidewalk, looking utterly bewildered. The man in the suits conferred for a moment. Then the man looked up, his gaze sweeping across the houses that overlooked the scene. His eyes paused on my office window, just as Marcus's had. He didn't stare. It was just a brief clinical assessment. But in that instant, I knew. He knew someone had seen it all. A cold dread, heavier than anything I had felt before, settled in my stomach. This was bigger than a couple of rogue cops. Marcus wasn't just some guy, and I wasn't just some witness. I was a loose end. For the rest of the evening, Sarah and I tried to pretend things were normal. We made dinner, we watched TV, but the silence in our house was deafening, punctuated only by the image of a baton swinging and the sound of bone breaking. Every car that passed on the street made us jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. At around 9 o'clock, it happened. A sharp, authoritative knock on our front door. It wasn't the gentle rap of a neighbor. It was a knock that didn't expect to be ignored. Sarah and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with the same silent fear. I walked slowly to the door, my heart pounding in my throat. I peered through the peephole. Standing on my doorstep were the man and the woman in the dark business suits. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. The man looked at me, his expression unreadable, his eyes analytical. "Mr. Henderson," he asked, his voice calm and level. "We're with the Bureau. We understand you had a clear view of the incident involving Special Agent Marcus Thorne this afternoon." He held up a leather wallet, flipping it open. It wasn't a police badge. Emblazoned in gold was the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The letters FBI burned into my retinas. Special Agent Marcus Thorne. Sarah's joke about him being a spy crashed back into my mind with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a joke. It was the terrifying, unbelievable truth. The enigmatic man across the street, the man whose legs I watched get snapped like twigs, was a federal agent. My mouth was dry. Yes, yes, I saw some of it, I stammered, my carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. The woman, Agent Riley, according to the ID she showed me, gave a small, humorless smile. Our preliminary information suggests you saw all of it, Mr. Henderson. May we come in? It wasn't a question. It was a directive. I stepped back, holding the door open, and they glided into my foyer. They moved with a quiet economy of motion, their eyes scanning everything, the family photos on the wall, the layout of the rooms, the staircase leading to my office. Agent Phillips, the man, was clearly the lead. He had a stillness about him that was more intimidating than any overt threat. Sarah came to stand beside me, her hand gripping my arm so tightly I could feel her nails digging into my skin. Is he going to be okay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Agent Thorne is in surgery," Agent Riley answered coolly, her gaze softening just a fraction. "He has extensive comminuted fractures in both his tibia and fibula. He's one of the toughest men I know, but his recovery will be long. His field days are likely over." The casual, clinical way she described his career-ending injuries sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. This wasn't just an assault. It was the destruction of a man's life, his entire identity. "We need your statement," Agent Phillips said, cutting through the heavy silence. "Everything you saw, every word you heard. We'll need to impound any recordings you may have, your phone, computer." "I didn't record anything," I said a little too quickly. "I was on a work call. I just watched." Phillips's eyes held mine. He knew I was lying. I had been on a video call, and my webcam was pointed directly out the window. The entire incident, the confrontation, the brutal assault, the sound, it was all captured. A high-definition nightmare saved on my company's cloud server. My mind raced. If I handed that over, I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was the witness. The one with the perfect, undeniable proof. Miller and Davis wouldn't just face suspension. They'd face federal charges. Cops like that, the ones with the swagger and the short fuses, they had friends. They had a union. Testifying against them could paint a target on my family's back for the rest of our lives. "It would be in your best interest to be completely cooperative, Mr. Henderson," Phillips said, his voice dropping slightly. The unspoken threat hung in the air between us. Taking a shaky breath, I led them upstairs to my office. They were all business. Riley took my statement, her pen scratching across her notepad with methodical precision. I recounted everything, from the moment the patrol car arrived to the sickening crack of the baton. As I spoke, the images replayed in my head, more vivid and horrifying each time. Phillips, meanwhile, sat at my desk, his fingers flying across a government-issued tablet he'd produced. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt like he was analyzing my every word, every hesitation. "The video call you were on," he said without looking up. "Was it recorded?" The moment of truth. My throat closed up. Lying to the FBI was a federal crime in itself. But telling the truth felt like pulling the pin on a grenade and handing it to my wife. "Yes," I finally croaked. "It records to a cloud server automatically." Phillips nodded once, as if he had merely confirmed what he already knew. "We'll need access to that." He handed me a form. It was a consent waiver, printed on official Department of Justice letterhead, giving them permission to access my corporate accounts. My hand shook as I signed it. I felt like I was signing away the quiet, simple life I had always known. After another hour, they finally had what they came for, the digital keys to the most damning piece of evidence imaginable. As they prepared to leave, Agent Riley paused at the door. "Those officers, Miller and Davis," she said, her professional mask slipping for a moment to reveal a flash of cold fury. They've been subjects of numerous internal affairs complaints, excessive force, racial profiling. The local PD has buried every single one. They thought Agent Thorne was just another black man they could intimidate and brutalize with no consequences. She looked me straight in the eye. Your testimony, your recording, this is bigger than just an assault charge. This is about rooting out a cancer. You're doing the right thing. I wanted to believe her, but as I watched their unmarked car disappear down the street, all I felt was a suffocating fear. Doing the right thing felt terrifyingly like putting my family in the crossfires. The next 2 days were a blur of anxiety. The neighborhood was abuzz. The official story from the local police department released to the news was vague. An officer-involved incident during the apprehension of a suspect who was resisting arrest. No names were released. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic obfuscation. But we knew the truth, and now the FBI knew we knew. On the third day, I was taking the trash out, the same mundane task that had led to Marcus's life being shattered, when a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. It was a battered-looking Honda, not the kind of vehicle you'd expect in our neighborhood. The driver's side window rolled down. It was the younger cop, Davis. His uniform was gone, replaced by a rumpled t-shirt. His face was ashing, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice raspy. He looked around nervously, as if expecting FBI agents to materialize from the rose bushes. I froze, my hand clutching the garbage can. "What do you want?" I know they talked to you," he stammered. "The feds. I know you saw what happened." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Miller, he's telling them it was a righteous takedown. He's saying Thorne came at him with a weapon, that he had no choice. He's lying. I was there. There was no weapon." "Then why didn't you stop him?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Davis flinched. "You don't understand. Miller, he's got connections. He's got half the department in his pocket. If I go against him, my career is over. My life could be in danger. My family." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "They're going to ask you to testify. They're going to show them your video. Please, just tell them you didn't see it clearly. Tell them it was blurry, that you couldn't hear anything. If you do that, I'll come forward. I'll say what really happened, but I'll leave your part out of it. I'll take the heat. Just please don't show them that tape." I stared at him, my mind reeling. He was offering me an out, a way to get my family out of the line of fire. But it meant letting Miller's official lie stand, at least for a while. It meant trusting this terrified, compromised cop to do the right thing when the pressure was on. Before I could answer, Davis's eyes darted to my driveway. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the small oil stain on the asphalt, the stain that hadn't been there yesterday. "You have to check your car, Mr. Henderson," he whispered, his voice trembling with a new, urgent fear. "Check your brake lines, now." He didn't wait for a response. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, and his Honda squealed away down the street, leaving me standing alone in the silence, a cold dread washing over me as his warning echoed in my ears. My blood ran cold. Brake lines. The words hung in the air, heavy and menacing. I dropped the trash bag and scrambled to the driver's side of my SUV, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'm no mechanic, but I knew enough to get down on my hands and knees and look. The asphalt beneath the front axle was slick with a dark, glistening fluid. Following the drip upwards, I saw it. A clean, precise cut in the brake line, so neat it could only have been deliberate. Someone had been in my driveway in the middle of the night. Someone had tried to kill me, or at least arrange a fatal accident. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was a direct threat. Miller or his friends weren't just trying to scare me into silence. They were trying to erase me from the equation entirely. Davis wasn't just a scared rookie. He was a terrified man trying to warn me before it was too late. I backed away from the car slowly, my mind a chaotic whirl of fear and fury. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I didn't call the local police. Who could I trust? Instead, I called the number Agent Phillips had given me. He answered on the first ring. "Phillips?" "They cut my brake lines," I blurted out, my voice a ragged whisper. "Officer Davis just came to my house. He warned me. They tried to kill me." There was a moment of dead silence on the line. Then, "Stay in your house, Mr. Henderson. Lock your doors. Do not go near the vehicle. A team is on their way to you. We'll be there in 5 minutes." The line went dead. True to his word, less than 5 minutes later, 2 black SUVs, the same kind the agents had been in before, screeched to a halt in front of my house. This time, the agents who emerged were not in suits. They were wearing tactical gear, carrying weapons I'd only ever seen in movies. They secured the perimeter of my house with a terrifying efficiency, while Phillips and Riley came to my front door. "Are you and your wife all right?" Phillips asked, his face a grim mask. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He looked past me at Sarah, who was standing white-faced in the hallway. Then his eyes went to the oil stain on the driveway. A flicker of something dark and dangerous crossed his face. "Davis came to you." "He told me to say the video was blurry," I explained, the words tumbling out. "He said Miller was lying, claiming Marcus, Agent Thorne, had a weapon. He said if I backed off, he would come forward. Then he saw the fluid and told me to check the brakes." Riley spoke into her wrist communicator. "Get a unit to Officer Davis's location, now. He's a material witness. Place him in protective custody." It was the turning point, the moment my fear was burned away by a cold, hard rage. They had come from my family. They had brought this war to my doorstep. My quiet, safe life was already gone, torched by a corrupt cop with a baton. There was no going back. There was only forward. "That video," I said, my voice steady now. "You'll have it in an hour. I'll give you a sworn statement, on the record, right now. I'll testify in front of a grand jury. I'll do whatever it takes. You get these bastards. You get them." Phillips looked at me, a glimmer of respect in his cold eyes. "We will, Mr. Henderson. I promise you that." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We were moved to a hotel under FBI protection. Our house became a federal crime scene. Forensics found Miller's fingerprints on the tool used to cut my brake line. Davis, now safely in federal custody, gave a full confession, corroborating my story and detailing a pattern of abuse and cover-ups by Miller and a handful of other officers that went back years. My video recording was the centerpiece of the federal case, irrefutable, crystal-clear evidence of a brutal, unprovoked assault and a violation of civil rights under color of law. The trial was swift. The video was played for the jury, and a stunned silence fell over the courtroom as the sickening crack of Marcus's bones echoed from the speakers. Miller's defense, his fabricated story of a weapon and a violent suspect, evaporated in the face of the digital truth. He was found guilty on all federal charges: deprivation of rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering for the attempt on my life. He was sentenced to 30 years in a federal prison with no possibility of parole. Davis, in exchange for his testimony, received a much lighter sentence. Several other officers in the department were implicated in the cover-up and forced to resign, their careers ending in disgrace. A few months later, life had begun to find a new kind of normal. We were back in our house, the quiet of the cul-de-sac restored. One afternoon, a sleek black sedan, not the one from before, but a newer model, pulled into Marcus's driveway. The driver's side door opened, and Marcus got out. He used a carbon fiber cane, and his gait was slow, deliberate, but he was walking. He saw me watching from my window, and instead of the curt nod I was used to, he raised a hand in a small wave. I went outside. We met at the edge of our lawns, the invisible property line that had once seemed like a vast gulf between strangers. "Heard you had a little excitement while I was away," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile. "You could say that," I replied. "How are you, really?" He tapped his leg with the cane. "The doctors say I'll walk without this thing eventually. They say I'm lucky. Desk duty for the rest of my career, but I'm walking." He looked at me, his gaze direct and filled with a gravity I finally understood. "I saw the evidence file, Henderson. I saw the recording. They told me what you did, the risks you and your family took. You didn't have to do that. Most people wouldn't have." I thought about the fear, the sleepless nights, the terror of finding that cut brake line. But then I thought about the sound of that baton and the look in his eyes as he lay broken on the asphalt. "Yes, I did," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the truth of those words settle deep in my bones. They brought the fight to the wrong neighborhood. He nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. "Well, if you ever need anything," he said, extending a hand, "anything at all, the guy across the street owes you one." I shook his hand. It was firm, strong, and steady. The ghost in the slate gray Colonial was gone. In his place was a man named Marcus, my neighbor, and for the first time since he'd moved in, our quiet little street finally felt safe again.